Hello viewer, the Nameless Scholar here, and I want to ask you a question.
I ever tell you what the definition of insanity is? Insanity is doing the exact same fucking thing over and over again, expecting shit to change. That is crazy.
Games Workshop's tabletop games and IPs have been in an Ouroboros, a serpent that perpetually eats its own tail. You can see this in not just in the freer cycles, but also the lore and their new releases as well. And I'm going to talk to you about my observations and what I make of this whole situation as somebody who's not a graybeard. Now, before I begin, I want to clarify by stating that I am in no way a lore expert either. Far from it. However, I am someone who has played older editions of Warhammer 40k and have read a few of the books. So I'm familiar as to how the older editions played. So I will be telling this from my perspective, so I might as well be susceptible to not know some stuff or even get stuff wrong. So I want you to keep this in mind. Let's start with the tabletop game side of things. It's the year 2015. Warhammer The End Times is announced. Because the Tactical Marines kit sold more than the entirety of Warhammer Fantasy Battle model range, Games Workshop has decided to axe their rank and file a wargame. From the death of Warhammer Fantasy came Age of Sigmar 1st Edition, which had a disastrous launch. It was universally hated because people's entire armies had been invalidated, and the lore was as banal as the game itself. Instead of a sandbox that you could mess around with that was static, it had an ongoing storyline that changed every 3 years. Although, as someone who started with 40k and got to learn both of Fantasy and Age of Sigmar later, the latter actually improved in lore as time went on, stopped trying to be Warhammer Fantasy, and instead decided to become a grimdark high fantasy setting that you could play around in the sandbox of the edition's specific event. Before the next big event came to be, that is. However, the damage was already done. The death of Warhammer Fantasy led to the name of Games Workshop written in the customer's Great Book of Grudges, and because of this, Age of Sigmar will forever be known as the game that replaced Warhammer Fantasy. Then, it was the tail end of 2016, start of 2017. The Wrath of Magnus happened. Magnus the Red and the Thousand Sons had assaulted Fenris. Then came the Gathering Storm. Then Cadia fell. Games Workshop realized that with the death of Warhammer Fantasy, the disastrous launch of Age of Sigmar 1st Edition, and the power creep that had bloated 7th Edition, they were close to getting bankrupt. They could not afford another End Times. It would have been suicide, and so they decided to soft reboot Warhammer 40k. If you have watched my previous videos, I have said time and again that I do not believe that the Primaris were ever meant to be true-scale Marines. They were meant to be the sci-fi equivalent of the Stormcast Eternals, and a full-on replacement of the Firstborn range. Had GW been able to axe 40k and get away with it? With the introduction of Primaris and the return of Mortarion, GW opted for the Boiling Frog effect to turn Warhammer 40k into Age of Sigmar in space. Thus came Warhammer 40k 8th Edition, which was the edition that I started in. So the rules were completely Sigmarized and essentially turned 40k into watered-down Age of Sigmar, rendering power armor useless and personally introducing stratagems in a long-term attempt to remove war gear to have all models just over-specialized roles instead of customizable and flexible. Which brings us to 10th edition. New indices were introduced alongside new mechanics like the OC stat, 6s being criticals, and detachments were added back from 7th edition. A year afterwards, Age of Sigmar 4th edition came out, and well, they had 40k-fied Age of Sigmar. It also had new indexes, and it was essentially a soft reset. Not reboot, but a reset. That the Stormcast Eternals were Thanos, as in half of their rage were removed. The OC stat, the criticals, and the detachment system from 10th edition were brought to it. So, Warhammer Age of Sigmar became the testbed for Warhammer 40k 8th edition onwards. Then 8th edition came, and it was just watered down Age of Sigmar. Then 10th edition came, and then Age of Sigmar 4th edition became 10th edition. Age of Sigmar Boogaloo? This is a tabletop cannibalizing itself on the 3-year cycle. Horus Heresy reverted back to Rogue Trader of all things, rules-wise, and I wonder what Warhammer the Old World will become. First edition? Mordheim? It's all about the 3-year cycle. The higher-ups do not give the game designers enough time to do anything substantial, really. If it was like, say, a 6-year cycle, the game could grow, but as soon as the last codex is released, well, the new edition will be in just 6 months ahead, which forces them to cannibalize on editions past and borrow from new editions, and they won't even have time to play test it either. It's why every edition, every codex becomes more broken than the last in 40k, with day 1 FAQs offering a patchwork solution. This is mainly done because the higher-ups see short-term profit in this. Keep this in mind, because it will be irrelevant later. And the Ouroboros is also reflected in 40k's lore. The new lore, post-Fall of Cadia, although it does has its own things like the Pariah Nexus, we see previous places. For example, we had a return to Armageddon. In the near future, we will probably have a return to Badab with the announcement of the new Huron Blackheart model. In Dawn of War 4, Steve Bloom, voiced by Steve Bloom, explains that, well, we're back at Cronus, where Dawn of War Dark Crusade took place in. Keep in mind, when Dawn of War Dark Crusade was released, the Necrons were not retconned to become Tomb Kings in space yet. They were still very much the old Krons with the pariahs and stuff. Well, the reason why this is happening is because even if GW views their fans and customers with complete and utter contempt, they need them. They need us. They are essentially opting for the safe route of things that are already established. It's why Hollywood is full of reboots and sequels to already existing movies. Only rarely is something original ever gets produced. GW saw the massive success of Space Marine 2, and they are going to continue that route because it succeeded. They see Space Marine 2 and they see that they hit the jackpot. One of their attempts to become an IP company, a media empire. For the longest time, GW has advertised itself as a premium miniatures company. They know that in due time, even if not in the near future, 3D printing will become cheaper and more common. So that's why they are trying to switch from their roots to become an IP lender company. It's why they changed their logo to whatever it is now. They see the Greybeards as a threat to their profit margins, whether they criticize the Primaris, the death of Warhammer Fantasy, or that how Space Marine 2 is essentially glorified shovelware. Because here's the thing, GW is a profit-first company. If it sees a threat to its profit margins, it will lash out because, here's the thing, the Games Workshop method is the only way to gain any profit from producing miniatures. At least in the wargaming sense. My disdain for Trench Crusade aside, they realized that the only way to profit in tabletop wargaming is the Games Workshop model. That's why they dropped the 3D printing method. It's why Parabellum with Conquest never went that route. Back when D&D was still owned by TSR, even when Gary Gygax was around and after he was gone, TSR knew that D&D was not a profitable business. D&D still isn't a profitable business despite the massive popularization of it by Stranger Things and the massive success of Baldur's Gate 3, which I find it to be a fluke, but it's not from the game itself. Well, partially, but that's neither here nor there. Well, the point is, D&D is, alongside Wizards of the Coast, of course, is mainly carried by Hasbro and Magic the Gathering. And MTG has its whales that keeps it barely afloat. They could get away with it because they primarily sold rules. Yes, Games Workshop is a rules-selling company that for decades gaslit itself and its customers to believe that it is a, quote, premium miniatures company, unquote, even though more than half the time they cannot sculpt female models worth a damn. Games Workshop is a profit-first company, and they have to be a profit-first company because they sell more than just rules. Sculpting is not cheap. It's that they still sell the models which have paid for their mold a long time ago at full price, and continue to do so. So, in this situation, the reason why Games Workshop has been cannibalizing the rules of their games and the lores of their setting is because they favor short term profit over long term sustainability at all times. Now, I don't have problems with corporations wanting to earn profit, far from it. What I do have a problem with is the worsening of the product as a result of the constant chase of short term profit. Corporations might have to earn profits to sustain themselves, pay their workers, and fund their future endeavors, but as customers, we are entitled to good products. If the constant chase of short-term profit is harming the long-term quality of your product, you are doing something wrong. It's that, here's the thing. Games Workshop know that they are the tabletop wargaming market. They have no true competition. They are unfortunately too big to fail. I mean, who's going to replace them? Trench Crusade? Please! They realize that Games Workshop's model is the only way of actually earning profits. Amassing $3 million on Kickstarter only gets you so far, which, by the way, they didn't even fulfill all of their Kickstarter promises. And a cynic like me would claim that this bait and switch was planned. However, I don't believe it. War Machine? The game straight up imploded. Battletech? Razor Fist can plug his ears and go la 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 all he wants. It's been in the gutter for a long time. Conquest? As much as I like the last argument of Kings, no. Parabellum is as greedy, if not greedier than Games Workshop. Infinity? No, I think their metal models are great, it's that I don't see it. Same with Bolt Action and Conflict 47. But that's more because people are looking for another classic 40k and new power armor to cling to. But that's a video for another time, hint hint. The pattern is that Games Workshop is the tabletop wargaming company around, and they can get away with putting out the things they put out and essentially cut costs. They know they don't have to put more effort to sculpt more female faces like that of Lady Malice, because they know people will buy them anyways. This will be the status quo for the foreseeable future. I don't see Games Workshop going bankrupt anytime soon. What I do see is that by the time 3D printing does become more common, easier, and accessible, they will become a media conglomerate, and the miniatures parts, it will be an afterthought. By that point, Warhammer 40k, Horus Heresy, even Old World and Age of Sigmar will be completely unrecognizable, and that's sad. Games Workshop is not going anywhere anytime soon. So anyways, guys, this is going to be it for this video. I'm the Nameless Scholar, and like the Dark Angels would say, never forget, never forgive.